Have you ever reached into your freezer, thinking you were saving something for later, only to find a soggy, tasteless mess? You're not alone. Many of us grew up learning to freeze food as a way to stretch our groceries, reduce waste, and save time. But here's the truth. Some foods simply don't belong in the freezer. In fact, you may be unknowingly ruining the texture, taste, or even safety of foods you rely on every day. From creamy potato salad to that leftover fried chicken, the freezer can turn your favorites into disappointments. And let's be honest, as we get older, good food matters more than ever. The little things, crunch, creaminess, flavor, they bring us comfort and joy. In this video, we're going to walk through 9 everyday foods that seem freezer safe, but truly aren't. And if you've frozen any of them before, don't worry, you're not alone. By the end, you'll know exactly what to keep in your freezer and what to leave out for better taste, better health, and a little more peace of mind. 1. Leafy greens and lettuce, the slippery surprise. You probably love a crisp, fresh salad, romaine, iceberg, maybe even a little spinach or arugula. But if you've ever tried freezing leafy greens, especially ones meant to be eaten raw, you likely ran into a soggy disappointment. The moment these greens thaw, they lose their crunch, their structure collapses, and what you're left with feels more like wet tissue than something you'd want to eat. Here's why. Leafy greens are mostly made of water. When frozen, that water expands, causing the plant cells to burst. Once thawed, the water doesn't return to its original place. Instead, it leaks out, leaving your lettuce limp and lifeless. Even if the greens still smell okay, the texture will be completely different. Slimy, soft, and often unappetizing. Many older adults try freezing greens to save money or avoid waste, especially if they live alone and can't use a whole bag of lettuce quickly. The intention is good, but the result can be frustrating. You end up wasting the food anyway, just a little later. Now, there's a small exception. If you're freezing spinach or kale with the plan to cook it later, like in soups or casseroles, it can still work. Cooking changes the texture anyway, so the freezer damage is less noticeable. Just remember to wash and lightly blanch the greens first, then pack them in airtight containers. But for raw salads, don't freeze your lettuce. If you find yourself tossing unused greens often, try buying smaller amounts more frequently, or switch to heartier greens like cabbage that lasts longer in the fridge. And if you ever miss the crisp bite of a salad from your younger years, remember, it's not your memory playing tricks. Lettuce really was better before it hit the freezer. 2. Mayonnaise-based salads, the slippery spread. Let's talk about something many of us keep in the fridge, especially after family gatherings or summer picnics. Potato salad, tuna salad, egg salad, or chicken salad. These creamy favorites are often made in big batches, and it feels natural to toss the leftovers in the freezer to avoid waste. But freezing mayonnaise-based dishes is almost always a mistake. Why? Mayonnaise is an emulsion. That means it's a delicate mixture of oil, egg yolk, and acid, usually lemon juice or vinegar. When frozen, the emulsion breaks, the oil separates from the water, and when you thaw the salad, it becomes watery, grainy, and sometimes even a little sour. The texture turns unpleasant, and the dish loses that creamy, comforting mouthfeel we love. It's not just about looks or texture. When food separates like that, it can create uneven pockets of moisture that make bacterial growth more likely if not handled properly. That's especially risky for older adults, who are more vulnerable to foodborne illness. Many people don't realize this until they thaw the container, expecting their classic salad to taste just as good, only to be met with disappointment. The creamy consistency is gone, the flavors are off, the food feels like it's spoiled even if it technically isn't. If you often have leftover salads and want to store them longer, the best method is to freeze the cooked components like boiled potatoes or chopped chicken, separately. Only mix in the mayo once the food is thawed and ready to eat. This keeps the flavors and textures closer to what they should be. The next time you're tempted to toss that half-full container of egg salad into the freezer, pause. Ask yourself, will I really want to eat this once it thaws? You deserve better than watery mush. You deserve food that still feels like a treat, not a chore. 3. Fried foods. The crunch that never comes back. Few things are more satisfying than that first crispy bite of fried chicken, onion rings, or even homemade breaded pork chops. There's a reason fried foods hold a special place in many hearts and many family traditions. That golden crunchy coating isn't just about flavor. It's about memory, comfort, and satisfaction. But when it comes to freezing fried foods, you're likely to be let down. Fried foods just don't freeze well. Even if they look okay when they come out of the freezer, once you reheat them, the texture is never the same. The outer crust, once crisp and airy, becomes soft, soggy, or chewy. The coating absorbs moisture from the inside out during the freezing and thawing process, and no amount of reheating, microwave, oven, or skillet can fully bring back the original crunch. This is especially frustrating for older adults who cook in batches to save time or energy. It might seem smart to fry up a big batch and store the rest, but what comes out of the freezer days later rarely matches what came fresh from the pan. Let's not forget food safety. Fried foods that have been sitting out too long before freezing, or not sealed properly, can be more susceptible to spoilage. Leftover oil on the surface can go rancid faster, and reheating doesn't always kill off potential bacteria hiding in undercooked spots. There are some exceptions. Commercial frozen fried products, like store-bought French fries or breaded chicken tenders, are processed specifically to survive freezing. But your homemade fish fillets or buttermilk chicken? Not the same story. If you want to enjoy fried food later, it's better to prepare the ingredients ahead, seasoned, breaded, and raw, and freeze those. Then fry them fresh when you're ready to eat. That way, you preserve the crunch and the joy that comes with it. After all, food should bring you pleasure, not compromise. And that first bite of something crispy should still light up your taste buds, even if it's not fresh from the fryer. Fervor. Whole eggs in the shell. The eggsplosion you didn't see coming. Eggs are one of the most versatile and affordable sources of protein, especially for older adults looking to keep meals simple but nutritious. Whether you like them scrambled, boiled, or baked into a casserole, eggs are a kitchen staple, so it seems logical. You've got a few extras, you're heading out of town, or maybe you just want to make them last longer. Why not toss them in the freezer? Here's why. Freezing whole eggs in the shell is a big mistake, and for some, it's a messy one. Eggs contain a lot of water inside. When water freezes, it expands. So when you place a raw egg in its shell into the freezer, that expansion puts pressure on the shell. Best case, the egg cracks silently. Worst case, it bursts wide open. What you find later might look like a frozen science experiment gone wrong: cracked shells, egg whites oozing into your freezer drawer, and a cleanup no one wants. Even if the shell stays intact, the freezing process changes the texture of the egg. Once thawed, raw egg whites become watery and lose their ability to whip properly, and the yolks may turn thick and gelatinous. You'll notice this especially if you're trying to make something like scrambled eggs or an omelet. What once cooked up soft and fluffy now feels rubbery and uneven. Hard-boiled eggs aren't safe from the freezer either. The whites become tough and spongy, while the yolks can turn grainy. It's disappointing, especially if you were planning on adding them to a salad or sandwich. Now, a Birkin? If you really need to freeze eggs, there's a better way. Crack them first. Beat them lightly to mix the whites and yolks together. Pour the mixture into a freezer-safe container or ice cube tray. You can even label the portions. 1 cube equals 1 egg, so it's easier to cook with later. Some people add a pinch of salt or sugar to stabilize the texture, depending on whether the eggs will be used for savory or sweet dishes. We all want to avoid wasting good food, but when it comes to eggs, freezing them the wrong way does more harm than good, and no one wants to open the freezer and find an egg that exploded in the middle of the night. Keep your eggs safe, simple, and shell-free when it comes to freezing. 5. Cucumbers and tomatoes. The crunch that disappears overnight. There's something so satisfying about a fresh cucumber slice or a juicy tomato on your plate. Whether it's a summer sandwich, a side salad, or just something to snack on, cucumbers and tomatoes are go-to ingredients in many American kitchens, especially for older adults who enjoy light, refreshing meals. But here's the truth. Cucumbers and tomatoes do not belong in your freezer. Even if they seem like good candidates because they're full of water, spoiler alert, it's that exact reason that makes freezing them a bad idea. Both of these vegetables are made up of more than 90% water. When frozen, the water inside their cells expands, just like with leafy greens. But here's the catch. Once that water expands and the cells rupture, the texture is never the same again. After thawing, cucumbers turn slimy and mushy, and tomatoes collapse into a watery mess. Their structure breaks down completely. What once added freshness and crunch now feels like a sponge soaked in cold soup. Now some people say, but I can cook with thawed tomatoes. And that's partially true. If you're making soup, stew, or pasta sauce, frozen tomatoes can be used after being peeled and cooked down. They lose their texture, but not all of their flavor. Still, don't expect them to behave like fresh ones. You won't want them on a sandwich or a salad ever again. As for cucumbers, there's almost no redemption there. Frozen cucumbers lose everything that makes them enjoyable. They're limp, watery, and often bitter. Even using them in smoothies or cold soups like gazpacho can leave you with a strange texture and diluted flavor. If you often buy cucumbers or tomatoes in bulk and worry about waste, try other storage methods instead. Tomatoes actually store well on the counter for several days if kept out of direct sunlight. Refrigerating them can dull their flavor, but it's still better than freezing. Cucumbers do best in the crisper drawer, wrapped loosely in a paper towel to reduce moisture buildup. If you grow your own and have too much to use up, try pickling cucumbers or canning tomatoes. Both are old-fashioned, but effective ways to preserve flavor without sacrificing texture, and they don't require a freezer at all. Preserving food is smart, but preserving flavor, texture, and enjoyment, that's even smarter. 6. Cooked pasta and rice when saving turns to soggy. Pasta and rice are comfort foods. They're warm, filling, and easy to make in large batches. Many older adults like to prepare big pots of spaghetti, macaroni, or rice ahead of time and freeze the leftovers for quick meals later on. On paper, that sounds like a great plan. But in practice, freezing cooked pasta and rice often leads to a soggy, disappointing mess. The problem comes down to starch and moisture. When you cook pasta or rice, both absorb water. That's what makes them soft and tender. But when you freeze them, that water doesn't just sit there quietly. It forms ice crystals inside the food. As it freezes and thaws, those crystals break down the structure of the pasta or rice, making it mushy and overcooked when reheated. Have you ever taken out a frozen container of spaghetti and found that the noodles stuck together in one big gummy clump? That's exactly what happens when starch and ice get too close for comfort. And with rice, especially white rice, the grains can turn hard in some places and soggy in others. The texture becomes inconsistent, and the meal no longer feels fresh. Now, that's not to say you can't freeze pasta or rice. But if you do, there are a few important tricks. First, undercook them slightly, just to al dente. That means they're firm to the bite, not fully soft. This gives them room to finish cooking when you reheat. Second, toss the pasta with a little oil to prevent sticking. Third, let the food cool completely before freezing, and store it in airtight, flat containers so it freezes evenly. Also, avoid freezing pasta or rice already mixed with heavy sauces, creams, or cheeses. These can separate during thawing, leading to even more texture issues. Ultimately, if you value that just right bite, the kind where the pasta holds its shape and the rice is light and fluffy, freezing might not be the best solution. It's often better to freeze the sauce separately and cook a small batch of pasta or rice fresh when you're ready to eat. Convenience is important, but so is pleasure. And food that feels fresh even when reheated is a pleasure worth keeping. 7. Dairy products, the creamy things that fall apart. Dairy can be a tricky thing in the freezer. Some items hold up just fine. Blocks of hard cheese, frozen butter, even milk in small amounts. But others, not so much. Things like sour cream, yogurt, cream cheese, cottage cheese, and milk in large containers usually do not bounce back the way you hope. And the reason comes down to separation. Dairy products are made of a mix of water, fat, and protein. When frozen, the water inside separates from the fat and forms crystals. Once thawed, that smooth, creamy texture you love turns into a grainy, watery mess. You may open a container expecting your usual morning yogurt, only to find something that looks curdled or lumpy. For older adults, texture and taste matter a lot. Creamy foods are often chosen because they're easier to chew and enjoy. But when yogurt becomes runny or cream cheese turns gritty, it's just not the same. Worse, some of these items don't just lose texture, they lose flavor too. The delicate tang of sour cream or the smooth richness of a soft cheese can disappear entirely. Let's talk specifically about milk. Technically, milk can be frozen, but only if done carefully and used for cooking rather than drinking. When milk thaws, it often separates. It looks strange, with white clumps and a watery base. It's safe to drink if it's been frozen properly, but the mouthfeel changes so much that many people end up pouring it down the drain. If you've ever frozen a container of sour cream, you've probably seen this firsthand. It thaws into something closer to cottage cheese than cream, and once that separation happens, you can't whip it back into its original form. So, what should you do instead? First, try to buy only what you'll use within a week or two. Dairy has a shorter shelf life, but smart planning can reduce the need for freezing. Second, consider portioning soft dairy products into small servings you know you'll finish. That way, you waste less without needing to freeze it all. If you must freeze a dairy item, say you're going out of town and don't want it to spoil, know that it's better used in cooking after thawing. Thawed sour cream might not be good on a baked potato, but it's still fine in a casserole or soup, where texture isn't as noticeable. Freezing can be a lifesaver, but with dairy, it often leads to disappointment. So next time you think about tossing that yogurt or sour cream into the freezer, ask yourself, will I really enjoy this later? 8. Cooked potatoes, the grainy guilt you didn't expect. Potatoes are a staple in American kitchens, mashed, baked, fried, or roasted. They're filling, comforting, and easy to make in big batches. For older adults cooking for one or two, freezing leftovers can seem like a smart move. But here's the truth. Cooked potatoes, especially mashed or boiled ones, usually don't freeze well. The issue lies in texture. Potatoes have a high starch content. When you cook them, the starch gelatinizes, meaning it absorbs water and softens. But when you freeze them, that water turns into ice crystals, and those crystals damage the potato's internal structure. Once thawed, the result is often grainy, watery, or just plain strange. Mashed potatoes, in particular, can go from smooth and creamy to dry and crumbly, or worse, sticky and glue-like. Have you ever taken a container of frozen mashed potatoes out of the freezer, reheated it, and found that it had turned into a heavy, dense blob? That's freezer damage in action. Boiled potatoes, like the ones used in potato salad, face similar issues. Once frozen and thawed, they lose their firmness and become soft or mushy. If you try to mix them into salad, they may fall apart entirely. So, what can you do instead? If you want to freeze cooked potatoes, there are a few tips to make it work better. First, add a good amount of fat, like butter or cream, when mashing. Fat helps protect the texture during freezing. Second, portion them into small containers so they thaw more evenly. And third, reheat gently, preferably on the stovetop rather than in the microwave. Better yet, freeze the raw ingredients and cook them fresh when you're ready. Whole potatoes don't freeze well raw, but peeled and blanched potato chunks do. You can also prepare everything else for your mashed potatoes, like the seasoning or garlic butter, then make the mash fresh in just a few minutes. There's something deeply satisfying about a good bowl of mashed potatoes or a hearty potato side dish. But when texture goes wrong, the comfort disappears. If you're going to freeze potatoes, do it with care. Or better yet, make just enough to enjoy while it's still fresh. 9. Coffee and juice. When flavor fades, the joy does too. For many people, especially older adults, a hot cup of coffee in the morning or a glass of orange juice with breakfast is more than a habit. It's a moment of peace, a familiar comfort. So it might seem harmless to freeze leftover coffee or extra juice to use later. But unfortunately, these liquids don't always survive the freezer well. Let's start with coffee. While it's possible to freeze brewed coffee, the truth is, it often loses its flavor during the process. The rich aroma and depth that make coffee so enjoyable tend to fade over time in the freezer. When you thaw it, especially after more than a week or two, it can taste flat, dull, or even slightly bitter. For someone who looks forward to that first sip every morning, that's a disappointment. Coffee also tends to absorb smells from the freezer. If it's not stored in an airtight container, it might come out tasting like last week's frozen fish or leftover chili. Even coffee ice cubes, which some people make for iced drinks, can develop a freezer-burn taste if left too long. Now for juice. Fruit juices contain natural sugars and acids. Freezing changes the balance between them. Orange juice, for example, can separate when thawed, with pulp sinking and liquid floating. The texture becomes watery, and the flavor can seem off or weaker. Grape juice may get cloudy, and apple juice might lose its crispness. That doesn't mean you can never freeze coffee or juice, but you have to be careful. If you freeze coffee, do it in small amounts and use it quickly. Store it in sealed glass jars or silicone trays and label the date. For juice, shake well after thawing and understand it may not taste the same as it did fresh. Use it for smoothies or recipes instead of drinking straight from the glass. Still, if those beverages are part of your daily routine, fresh is almost always best. There's something special about opening a new carton of juice or brewing a fresh pot of coffee. Something that just doesn't come from thawed leftovers. So go ahead and enjoy your morning rituals. You've earned them. And let the freezer handle the peas and soups, not the pleasures that make your mornings feel just right.